Okay. Right? The good news is, welcome back after lunch, and the good news is we are back here after 2 o'clock, but we have 2 panels that should have happened by now. So without further ado, I am going to introduce I'm going to introduce Minister Nkwana Mashabane, who is the Minister in the Presidency for Women, Youth and Persons with Disabilities, and she was previously the Minister of Rural Development and Land Reform and Minister of International Relations and Cooperation. She is going to come and introduce the President, who will speak immediately after her. Over to you, Minister.
Program Directors, Your Excellency, Mr. President Cyril Ramaphosa, Speaker of the National Assembly, Mayor Nosiviwe Mapisa Ngakula, the co-chairs of the Presidential Summit, Planning Committee on Gender-Based Violence and Femicide, all honorable ministers in the room and deputy ministers, honorable premiers, members of the diplomatic corps, development partners. I saw our Secretary General of the Commonwealth just entering in style a few minutes ago. The First Lady of Namibia, we've been with her the whole day. The owners of the summit, civil society organizations, ladies and gentlemen, in April 2022, His Excellency President Ramaphosa made a clarion call for government and civil society at large to convene the second Presidential Summit on Gender-Based Violence and Femicide. The summit comes at a time where we continue to experience violent manifestations of inequality, poverty, unemployment, and sexism. Let me take this opportunity and say to our people living with albinism that we follow you. I follow you up to Duka in KwaZulu-Natal. And I have seen for myself how you also want to be counted. As we say, leave no one behind. This summit, this time around, carries a very clear mandate of account, accelerate, amplify now. We reflect on the past 4 years since the first summit. We must use this collaborative space to critically discuss the developments and barriers to the full effect of implementation of the National Strategic Plan. Over the years, there has been a critical developments in addressing gender-based violence and femicide in our country. This includes strengthening the criminal justice system, promoting participation and integration of women in the economy through the initiative, again, Mr. President, you started of Wekona, and establishing accountability frameworks to institutionalize the National Strategic Plan across sectors of our society. Despite these developments and many others, the scourge for gender-based violence and femicide continue to ravage our society. We can no longer afford to work in silos if we have to defeat this particular pandemic that we are fighting against. I believe that through accountability and embracing the diversity and strength in each other's sectors we can challenge the narrative that different sectors of society cannot work together. South Africans can work together, can bring different ideas, different initiatives to the table towards a common agenda. We must work together and keep our promises to building a safer and inclusive South Africa for women, youth, children, and all the marginalized people. As we close out the year with year 2 of the National Strategic Plan, we must prioritize and optimize policy and legal frameworks in our country. Let us work together for the institutionalization and accountability to accelerate, amplify the efforts to end the pandemic of gender-based violence and femicide. Ladies and gentlemen, I now have the honor and the pleasure to welcome His Excellency President Matamela Cyril Ramaphosa, the President of the Republic of South Africa, to come to the stage and deliver this keynote address. Mr. President.
Thank you. Let's be seated, please. Thank you, program directors, Minister of Women, Youth and Persons with Disabilities, Minister Mashabane, ministers who are here present, including those that some of you may have thought are not here, like the Minister of Health is definitely here. He could never miss a summit like this. And deputy ministers, the Speaker of our National Assembly, Ms. Nosiviwe Mapisa Ngakula, the First Lady of Namibia, Mayor Monica Gengos, the Secretary General of the Commonwealth, Baroness Patricia Scotland, representatives of the judiciary who are here with us and the magistracy, the premiers who have taken time of their very busy schedule to be here amongst us as well, and MECs who are also here, representatives and leaders of various civil society formations, representatives of interfaith community who are also here, and representatives of the diplomatic community who are here representing various countries that are our friends around the world, and also representing certain continents that are here, and representatives of local and international donor organizations that continue to support our work as a nation through civil society organizations as well as our work in government, representatives of international bodies such as the UN and other related organizations that we work with on an ongoing basis, and business representatives who are also here and who continue to support the work that we do, and fellow South Africans. I'd like to start off by saying I very much appreciated the earlier session, which gave many of you a platform and an opportunity to raise a number of questions as well as concerns. The questions that you have raised, some of which have been responded to, and some of which will be responded to, as was earlier said by our program directors, during the various other segments of this whole summit. And even those that were directed at me, where a number of you kept saying, Mr. President this, Mr. President that, Mr. President this. I wish you could be president so that I can say the same to you. Even those that I may not be able to touch on in my input now will also be responded to. I just want you to know that we really appreciate and welcome the remarks, the questions, concerns, as well as complaints that were raised here, some of which were raised at high-pitched level voices, and some of which people were stamping their feet on the ground. We appreciate and accept and embrace all that. We are a government that listens. When our people speak, we do listen. We may not be able to do everything that you all have articulated, but as you will see through what I am going to put before you, we are at work. We're meeting here at this second summit on gender-based violence and femicide, as was said, exactly 4 years to the day since we made a pledge that we made to each other to work together to end violence that the men of our country, perpetrate against women and children in South Africa. It was at the first presidential summit on GBV and femicide in 2018 that we collectively made a firm commitment to the nation to undertake a comprehensive, effective, united response to gender-based violence and femicide. We agreed then that we would develop a national strategic plan to guide our national response, to coordinate the various sectors involved in the fight against gender-based violence. It was also aimed at strengthening the government's response, and may I say, much more than just government, but the state's response, and to align the efforts of government as well as the private sector and civil society. We decided to embark on a number of interventions to deal with the scourge of gender-based violence and femicide in our country, a scourge which, as some of you have correctly said, I dubbed the second pandemic, because during COVID, gender-based violence reared its head in a most ugly way, and I dubbed it the second pandemic. And you are right in saying we should now see this as the first pandemic, now, because it continues to destroy the lives of the women and children of our country. They continue to be raped, they continue to be violated, and they continue to be killed. Then the first step that we came up with was to develop a gender-based violence and femicide emergency response action plan in 2019. I then requested Parliament's presiding officers to call a special joint sitting of both houses of Parliament to not only announce the plan, but to have the plan discussed and debated. The plan was embraced by members of Parliament representing all political parties. In many ways, this was a significant moment for us, in that gender-based violence and femicide was seen as a non-partisan matter on which all political parties demonstrated their preparedness to act together. This was followed by the release in April 2020 of the National Strategic Plan, a plan that you yourselves had carefully crafted and put together. And this is what gave me a great deal of joy and pride, that this was not a government plan, but it was a civil society-driven and drafted plan. Yet, despite our efforts, violence against women and children continues unabated in our country. Data from the South African Police Service shows that sexual offences and rape increased by 13% between 2017-2018 and 2020-2022. Between the first quarter of 2021 and the first quarter of 2022, there was a 52% increase in the murder of women and a 46% increase in the number of children who were murdered. Not a day goes by without a story in our newspapers, on television, and online platforms about a woman or a child that has lost their life or been abused in the most horrendous manner. Since the rape and murder of 19-year-old Uyinene Mkhejana in 2019, that sparked mass marches across the country. There have been so many more women that have been killed at the hands of men. Since then, the nation has been horrified by the brutal violence that took the lives of Tshegofatso Pule, Nosicele Mthembeni, Hilary Gadi, Namhla Mthwa, Dimpho Sikelenge, and many other women. Innocents like Asitandile Same, Tsimologo Luchabeng, Tanzi van Wyk, and Reagan Khanzi have fallen victims to heartless men and criminals. Just as the country was reeling from the news of a gang rape of a group of women in Krugersdorp, we were confronted with the news of the murder of a 4-year-old little Bukhabopo who was dismembered and her body parts thrown into a field. Just as babies are not being spared, even the elderly have become targets of violent men in our country. We have in recent times seen a spate of rapes and killings of elderly women, our mothers and our grandmothers, that are meant to be respected and treated with dignity. And this, in many ways, goes totally against the grain of our cultures and traditions as South Africans, that women should be treated with dignity, with respect, and not be violated. These horrors, in many ways, defy comprehension. There are really no words that we can use to describe them and the horrific manner in which all these murders and these rapes happen. They tell a story about our society that is deeply disturbing. It is a story of a nation that is seemingly at war with itself. But much worse, it is a story of a nation that is at war with the women of its country and the children of its country. These barbaric acts are a shameful indictment on the men of South Africa. It is not women who are responsible for ending such crimes. It is men who are responsible and who must take responsibility to bring violence, rapes, and murder against women. They are the ones who must act. As a society, ending violence against women and children cannot be anything but our foremost priority. And you are right in your anger. You are right in the frustration that you were expressing here. That in your view, and indeed in some cases absolutely correctly so, we are not making it the priority that it should be. Because this is about the lives of our country's women and children. And there can be no greater urgency. And I must say, with humility, we have not demonstrated that great urgency, as you were saying. And I say this with humility, with admission as well. We could have and we should be doing much better than we are. That is why all of us who are attending this summit must therefore be focused on action and results. The reason I appreciate your coming to this summit, and the reason I appreciate what you were articulating, very clear messages, is that you as civil society must insist that we should be accountable to you. You are the citizens of our country, and where we fail and falter, you must call us out. Where we let you down, you must speak out, as you were speaking out earlier this morning. This I embrace with my 2 arms or 2 hands, and I'm grateful that we have a very active citizenry and civil society organs or formations that, even as we are gathered here, you will express your views without any fear or favor, and even call me out as your president. I appreciate that. That is why it's important, therefore, to do what my 2 sisters sitting here were saying. Let us use this summit as a forum, as a platform, and an opportunity where we can come up with solutions. Some progress has been made, as it was admitted, but much more still needs to be done. So having called the first summit and this summit, and even if not everything has been done and achieved, let us not hold back from insisting that I, as President, and the ministers must be accountable. We must be able to give you answers on the issues that you raise. We also need to be critical about those areas of the National Strategic Plan in which there has been little or no progress. And I'd like you to spend time going through all the pillars and look at them introspectively, and where we have faltered and where we have not taken action, you must hold us accountable. We need practical plans to correct shortcomings and areas of weakness. Yes, you do need to ask, why was the council not set up? And you deserve answers to that. There are answers, but you need clearer answers so that you can understand clearly, so that that lapse should not happen again. The summit must look at what is working and what is not working, and what is needed to make a difference. We are in this journey together, and so therefore we must make the National Strategic Plan work, because it is our creation and we cannot ditch it. We must make sure that it works. Drafting the National Strategic Plan was a defining moment for our country when we were engulfed by rising incidents of gender-based violence. So therefore, this plan of ours must be made to work. So this is a summit of accountability. This second presidential summit is for us to assess progress in fulfilling the commitments we made at the first summit in 2018 and in implementing the National Strategic Plan. What we have assessed throughout this process is the importance of a collaborative, coordinated approach towards combating gender-based violence. We need to plan together, implement together, and account together. We owe this to the women of our country. We owe it to all who have been victims also of the scourge of gender-based violence, including their families and their loved ones. The families of these young women whose names I read are also looking at how we are going to deal with the issues that continue to haunt them as families, and how we are going to come up with practical solutions. In the end, we owe it to the people of South Africa, because this scourge affects all of us. It affects not only women, it affects the men of our country and all of us. The actions we take now will determine whether this crime forever remains a feature of our national life, or whether we can say we are the generation that has come to grips with gender-based violence, and we are also the generation that has ended it. One of the great successes of our efforts to fight gender-based violence is the extent to which social partners have rallied together around the National Strategic Plan. The presence here today of such a broad range of civil society organizations, public bodies, social formation is a testament to this. We are grateful to all those people from across society who have been involved throughout all the stages of the formulation of the National Strategic Plan and have guided its implementation. We are further grateful of all the working groups, co-chaired by government and civil society representatives that have been working tirelessly to drive the implementation of the NSP. To ensure that the issue of gender-based violence receives the highest attention, the responsibility for institutionalizing the NSP across all organs of the state was placed in the presidency. An End GBV collective was established as a multi-sectoral structure to drive collaborative implementation. Government departments are required to submit monthly reports to the presidency outlining their respective achievements towards the targets set out in the NSP. Someone did ask, are the reports being presented on a monthly basis? The performance has been sporadic, I must say. It hasn't been complete. And now we will be able to say, I'm going to ensure that the reports on ensuring that actions, interventions on the National Strategic Plan are given on a monthly basis by all is adhered to. Because this is too important, and also to ensure that the interministerial committee that we set up continues to coordinate the implementation of the NSP across government. Having set it up, it also needs to be reporting regularly, and the reports have been sporadic as well. The bill that will pave the way for the establishment of the Gender-Based Violence Femicide Council is currently before Parliament. Now, you may ask, why, as you did ask, why has it taken so long to have this council established? Just for you to know, I have been personally following this matter up and asking why is it taking so long? Professor Shisana can testify to this. Now, the problem is that, yes, government tends to move slowly. Now, some of you said you moved very quickly during the COVID pandemic. Yes, indeed we did. And we were armed by a legislation. The Disaster Management Act was able to arm us through the leadership of the Minister of Kokta. We were able, through the law, to set aside a number of considerations because we had a law that enabled us to do so. Now, piloting this act through the various processes, including taking it to NEDLAC, has taken far too long because the council in the end couldn't really be fully set up without the legislative instrument. And now, and this is where my point of humility comes in, and now that it is going through to go to Parliament, we will make sure that we move quicker. We have the council set up and the full machinery set up. One of the placards I saw there, something that you've been asking questions about, is about funding. Funding for this whole effort. One of the placards which I liked very much said, "Fund the fight. Fund this fight." Now, I like that placard because it basically means that real money needs to be set aside so that we can fund this fight. What we did do, and my brother who was moderating here asked about the 1.6 billion. The 1.6 billion was what was extracted from the various departments. In a way, we said, top slice your budgets, fund this whole effort. Various ministries, from health and all of them, they had to set aside money for funding the NSP. Now that we will have a proper council in terms of the law, Treasury will then be able to set aside on a separate basis the money that will fund this fight. So that is going to happen now. We must acknowledge that, as I said, this bill has taken far too long. And I say that with humility due to a rather long process of consultation. But we are hopeful that that whole process has been enriched by the extensive engagements. And you may ask, we moved very quickly with the laws that I'll talk about now. We moved very quickly with them and speeded them through because some of them were just really amendments to some of the existing laws. Now, in government, a law, for instance, takes up to 3 years, 3 full years before a law is properly on the statute book. But to ensure that a gendered lens is applied to public finances and resource allocation, as I said, in 2019 we adopted a framework on gender response planning, budgeting, monitoring and evaluation and auditing. This is in the early stages of implementation and we are working to institutionalize it at all levels of government. I said at the inaugural summit that we would fast-track the review of existing laws, as I was saying, and policies to ensure that they are more effective at preventing gender-based violence and providing greater support and care for survivors and bringing perpetrators to justice. And in January, and that is the reason why they were fast-tracked, because it was an amendment to existing laws. In January of this year, I was able to sign into law 3 key pieces of legislation, namely the Criminal Law Sexual Offences Related Matters Amendment Act, the Criminal and Related Matters Amendment Act, and the Domestic Violence Amendment Act. So these move very quickly. Now, these laws afford greater protection to survivors of gender-based violence and ensure that perpetrators, those who perpetrate violence against women and children, are no longer able to use legislative loopholes to evade prosecution. That through these laws, we will be able to catch them and to make sure that they are prosecuted and they are jailed, and if need be, the doors of the jail should be locked forever against such people. Other reforms that will strengthen the fight against gender-based violence include the Prevention and Combating of Hate Crimes and Hate Speech Bill that is currently before Parliament. One of you asked about this, and it is now currently before Parliament, as Minister Lamula said. The Victim Support Services Bill has been approved by Cabinet and published for public comment. In 2020, we also passed the Cyber Crimes Act, which affords protection against sex crimes like so-called revenge pornography, threats of sexual violence, threats of blackmail, and other acts that disproportionately affect women, especially girls. The Department of Justice and Correctional Services is currently seized with implementing reforms in the criminal justice system to ensure that the system prioritizes survivors and their needs. There has been particular focus on the accessibility and functioning of sexual offences courts. I'm sitting next to Baroness Scotland here, who used to be a minister in the UK. And she was sharing her own experience in terms of what they did in the UK in dealing with gender-based violence as well. And many of the things that she related are things that we are working on. And she is spreading the message also in the Commonwealth. I'm sure she will speak later and be able to give shed some light on what is happening there. So as we move forward with all this, we're finding that we are learning from other countries, and we are sort of going over ground that they've either gone on or we are in some cases even leading. Since the last presidential summit, 83 courts have been upgraded into sexual offences courts. Precisely what she and I were discussing about setting up of special courts that will deal with sexual offences. We have prioritized support for survivors through adequate sheltering services and one-stop services for victims of trauma. Now, expanding the network of Thuthuzela care centers was one of the commitments that we made at the 2018 presidential summit. Since the NSP was adopted, we have opened more new centers around the country. And I would like to see us opening many more. Another centers will be opened in Limpopo later this month. Now, this will add to the increase of Thuthuzela care centers across the country. And as I said, I want more of these to be opened up because they play a key function. Apart from being places of refuge, as well as being places of support for victims, these centers are proving to be very effective in improving conviction rates. In the last financial year, conviction rate of, as Minister Lamula was saying, of up to 77% was obtained for cases reported at the Thuthuzela care centers. It is a phenomenal improvement, a great improvement. It may seem little, but indeed, if you look at it from a historical point of view, we have made an improvement there. But this has been at your instance. This has been because you have been insisting that these Thuthuzela centers must be spread around more, they must be properly equipped, and there must be staff that will help victims of violence against women. As it stands, out of 52 districts across the country, 45 of our districts have at least one gender-based violence shelter, and 85% of these are funded by the government. We are pleased that the private sector has come to fund some, and indeed a number of non-governmental organizations. And we welcome these other organizations as well, including international bodies. For instance, I was talking to the ambassador earlier from the EU, who was telling me that they are spending up to R1 billion assisting various efforts that have to deal with many social issues that our country faces, but also on gender-based violence, producing literature supporting non-governmental organizations. And we must never disregard that. And that is why South Africa's position in the world is so valuable, because we've got countries that are friendly towards us and who help us, who support us in our efforts of rebuilding our country from the ashes of colonialism and ashes of apartheid misrule as well. We will do more to ensure that the remaining districts in our country without shelters are capacitated. I'd like to see, as I said, more of these shelters in all our districts throughout the country. The Department of Social Development has established a national emergency response team to offer trauma briefing in emergency situations. Someone was saying the Department of Social Development needs to be deeply involved in all these matters. It is, and it is working. Minister Zulu is working together with her staff in all matters related to this. It's not only the Ministry of Women, it's not only health, it's a whole range of other government departments that are involved, police and justice and all the others. The Gender-Based Violence Command Center has been further capacitated with a new facility that can accommodate more personnel. We've been working to ensure that South Africa's efforts to turn the tide against gender-based violence are aligned with global efforts. Last year, South Africa ratified, and somebody did ask about Convention 190. We ratified the International Labour Organization's Convention 190, aimed at eliminating violence and harassment in the workplace. And this is where our labour movement has played a key role in insisting and egging us on as government to ratify Convention 190. A key aspect of the National Strategic Plan is the economic empowerment of women. Since announcing our determination to direct at least 40% of public procurement to women-owned businesses, we have sought to establish an enabling environment to support women entrepreneurs. Now, I say an enabling environment because this is still work in progress. I firmly believe that empowering women economically empowers them so much more than you can imagine, because they are then less dependent on men who abuse them. We have trained more than 6,000 women to prepare them to take up procurement opportunities. And let me tell you that the message is spreading and deepening in government, that as we procure, we need to be making sure that 40% of what we procure is done through women-led businesses, women-owned businesses, as well as women-managed businesses. Now, through the Women's Economic Assembly, we have seen industry associations and companies committing to industry-wide gender transformation targets. I've been to the second Women's Economic Assembly this year, and I've been hugely impressed by the many women who are part of this assembly, who are themselves leading business women, who are getting a number of and mobilizing and recruiting a number of companies to come behind this whole effort of empowering our women economically. We can therefore say that we've made significant progress in putting what I would call the supporting architecture in place that is critical to a coordinated and collaborative fight against gender-based violence and femicide. In the joint sitting in Parliament in 2019, I called for government departments to allocate their various resources within their departments, as I said earlier, to combat gender-based violence. As a result, in February 2021, government announced the allocation of approximately 21 billion over a 3-year period to implement the various components of the National Strategic Plan. A significant portion of these funds has been committed to advancing the empowerment of women through procurement, through business support, and through access to economic opportunities for women. Funds have also been directed to expanding support to survivors, strengthening the response of the criminal justice system, and undertaking prevention programs. Now, you may not recognize this very easily and quickly, but when we said, for instance, with the Department of Justice, set aside money to respond to the NSP, allocating these courts, and I've been to some of the courts. I went to one court in Boysens here in Gauteng, where a special court had been set aside for children who are victims of gender-based violence to be able to testify in an environment that is conducive, where they are even able to demonstrate how they were violated through usage of various other, not necessarily toys, but other artifacts. And that has to be specially built. And that has to be money that is allocated by that department from its own budget when we said set aside money. And as I said, yes, we will continue to fund this fight because this is our collective fight. The Department of Planning, Monitoring and Evaluation has been tracking expenditure of this amount over the medium term. It is important that this summit does make an assessment both on the extent of funds that have been spent as well as the purposes to which these funds have been put. I do want your quest for accountability to get to that point so that you are able, as citizens of our country, to see precisely whether that money has been used and to what extent it has been used. We need to ensure that our resources are being directed to exactly where there is the greatest need and where they have the greatest impact. Last year, we established a private sector-led gender-based violence and femicide response fund. Someone was asking about this fund, and this was Fund 1, which received a commitment of 162 million and has to date funded 112 grant partners. Now, obviously, we want more money. And one of you said, apply a 2% levy on the private sector. Now, clearly, a levy is a tax, and tax has to be crafted by Treasury, and that is a matter that has to belong to the full taxation architecture of our country. And these are matters that we will obviously want to look at. We must acknowledge, however, that given the demand for services to address the very many different challenges that we have and various aspects to fight against gender-based violence, these funds that have been put aside are hugely inadequate. And as many of you were saying, you do want your NPOs to be well capacitated, because as one of you said, you are at the coalface, and I do recognize that you are at the coalface, and that is where you work with government, that is where you assist government, and that's precisely the reason why we should capacitate your organizations, we should strengthen your hand, because you are helping South Africans that we should fight against gender-based violence. So I do call on the private sector in particular to join hands with us, as we did when we set up the Solidarity Fund, to make more resources available and where they are needed most. And I will continue making this call on the private sector, because gender-based violence, the scourge of gender-based violence, has an economic cost, and we need to reduce that cost and to make sure that we all participate in implementing the National Strategic Plan. This fight is about far more than ensuring that survivors of gender-based violence get justice. It is much more than that. It is a plan that is meant to ensure that the women of our country regain their dignity, the women of our country do become much more economically empowered, that the women of our country do lead respectable lives. It is about preventing violence against women, no doubt. It is in the area of prevention that we need to place greater attention, but also to exert more effort and dedicate more resources. And the message that you are putting out to us about resources is very clear. It's clear because we've put in place a very good foundation. The foundation is going to be strengthened more as we get the legislation through Parliament, as we get the Council off the ground and get the Council to work more effectively. And I should explain, and that maybe on the Council issue, and we are nearing the end of the process of getting the Council established. Initially, and to be honest with you, initially when the issue of the Council was mooted by yourselves, when it got to us in government, it was conceptualized as similar to SANAC, the South African National AIDS Council. Now, SANAC works in a different way and it's structured in a different way. And somehow the thinking was that it could be another SANAC. And the discussions went on, and Treasury also said, yes, it can be structured like SANAC. But you, and this is where I'm really grateful for your interventions and the interventions of the people that you have put on the team, are very important. You came back and said, no, we don't want it to be structured like SANAC. We want this Council to work effectively so that it is like the frontline entity that is going to respond to gender-based violence. And I appreciate that. Now, indeed, having appreciated that, it means that we have listened very carefully to what you have had to say, and we are going to make sure that as we finalize the legislation and as the Council is put together, it will work as a very effective organ that is going to enable us to fight effectively to bring gender-based violence to an end. We have not mobilized the resources that are required for effective behavior change programs that link up the efforts of social partners in communities to address the attitudes and actions of men. In every part of society, in every workplace, in every school and college and university, in every government department, and in every municipality, we need to be organizing men's dialogues. Minister Cyril here was recounting the number of men's dialogues that have been held. Now, yesterday, a day before yesterday, I was at the University of Fort Hare, and I asked the Vice Chancellor, how are they responding to gender-based violence on campus? And he said, Mr. President, we're seeing a wonderful development. And I said, how come? He said, we've held men's dialogues, young men students dialogues, and they have gone to great length and depth to discuss the issues of gender-based violence with these young men. And the message has been sinking in, and the level of consciousness has been rising. and he said the incidents that we are seeing on campus are tapering down. The next round is going to be, he told me, to hold a women's dialogue, and thereafter they are then going to put the two together. And he said it has unleashed a new energy in dealing with gender-based violence at the university. And he says a number of young women have come forward and say, we now feel safe as we move around the campus, which shows that we do need to reach out to boys and young men to develop masculinities that value respect, understanding, and accountability. I was also exposed to another event, also in the Eastern Cape. Premier Oscar Mabuyane is here. I went to a school prize-giving ceremony, and these young boys had participated in a debate, age 16, 17, and so on, grade 11, grade 12. 8 of them had won prizes. I don't remember whether it was a provincial or national debate, and I asked each one of them what was the debate about, and they said it was on gender-based violence. Each one in their debate had handled a particular topic on gender-based violence. I was overjoyed to see that it's cascading even down at school level, where young boys are now being exposed to the issues of gender-based violence, and their consciousness is beginning to go up. Now, a good example of this is the project by Prime Stars, which in collaboration with government focuses on redefining masculinity amongst young men. This program needs to be rolled out to all schools in the country. We need to see, yes, the president, ministers, premiers, religious leaders, sports people, artists, educators, business leaders, and many others participating in various dialogues, outreach processes, and awareness-raising activities. Now, I have said to my staff, I want, as I move around the country now, to find time to devote to having men's dialogues so that we can talk about gender-based violence with the men of our country. Now, I'd like to thank our premiers. Our premiers are here. I want to thank them for convening Provincial Gender-Based Violence Summit leading up to this summit. I kept reading about it and seeing some of it on TV, and I've been hugely impressed that at provincial level we have been holding this summit, and with today's messaging, as well as what will be discussed in your various groupings, you will come up with a number of decisions and suggestions so that we continue spreading this message. And certainly the provincial summits have contributed a great deal to the level of raising consciousness in our nation and making the issue of gender-based violence and femicide topical, top of mind, so that we talk and talk and talk about it, so that more and more of our people in South Africa are aware of the scourge that is gender-based violence, this pandemic. We need to reweave the social fabric of our country so we become a society that is nurturing, is caring, is respectful, and in which the human rights of all are protected. Yes, even the human rights of people with albinism, as my brother was saying there, are protected, and that albinism should also be seen and recognized as a disability, as Minister Mkwana Mashabane said. We must build a society We must also build a society in which there is no place for crimes against women. And we must spread this message. We must instill this in the minds of the men of this country. That this should not be a country where violence is perpetrated against women and children. And members of the LGBTQI+ community as well. As we reflect on the progress on the last 4 years, we can count on a number of successes. We have put the issue of violence against women and children firmly on the national agenda and at the forefront of the minds of many South Africans. You will recall that during the COVID pandemic, I made it a special effort to continue talking about gender-based violence and even dubbed it, as I said, a pandemic, a second pandemic. We have established critical institutions and mobilized significant resources, but we need to do more. But there is a lot more that we still need to do. And the lot more that we need to do should now be discussed by yourselves, because you crafted the National Strategic Plan. Where there are gaps, where there are lapses, where there are weaknesses, we would like you to point that out, because this is a fight that we should not lose. We are not even close to where we want to be, and I'd like you to point that out more fully and firmly in your discussions. We are confronted with an immensely difficult task: to turn the mindsets of the men of our country, who are intoxicated often with their sense of masculinity, who are also intoxicated with a sense that they are superior to the women of our country, who are intoxicated with patriarchy, believing that, they are much more important than the women of our country. This is the task that we have on our hands, and this is a task that we need to win together. The road ahead, no doubt, will be long. It will also be challenging, but it is a road that we must walk together. Government cannot do it alone, nor can civil society do it alone. Even worse, nor can each organization do it alone. We need to be united in this fight. It is a road that we must walk together, but walk together with determination, so that the women and the children of this country may live in safety, in peace, and in happiness. We want to do nothing less than fundamentally and forever change our society. So in the end, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, working together as we have done over these last 4 years, I have no doubt that we will be able to overcome, and that in the end we will prevail. This is a fight that we must take on. Thank you very much.
Let's give him another round of applause. Mr. President, thank you very much. Okay. Thank you very much. Time is not on our side, but thank you so much. You have heard the words of the President that he has given us an enabling environment within which we should implement the programs by creating policies, laws, and having monitoring and evaluation approaches. You have heard him say he listened to you and that he is going to be processing some of these issues that we have identified, and we will also be taking forward what it is that you have said. I don't want to take much time because of it's late. What I would like to do is to invite the following. The First Lady of Namibia to come forward, Ambassador Sandra Kramer to come forward, Ambassador Ruben Brigetti to come forward, as well as Baron Patricia Scotland to come forward, please. So I'm going to start by introducing Ambassador Ruben Brigetti because he has another engagement that he has to go to. While he's coming forward, you can please come and be seated here. While he is coming, let me just go ahead and introduce him. He's an American diplomat and academic who has served as a United States ambassador to South Africa since 2022. He was the Vice Chancellor and President of the University of South in Tennessee from 2020 to 2021. He represents PEPFAR. PEPFAR is known to have really contributed significantly, not only to gender-based violence, but also to HIV in this country. While they were cutting quite a lot of budgets everywhere, PEPFAR tried by all means to make sure that programs in South Africa continue to be there. We really appreciate him being here. Ambassador, you've got the floor. I'm starting with you because you have another engagement. Thank you.
I was just saying I can't go before the First Lady. You must let her go first.
Okay, all right. There seems to be a change in terms of the program. I'm going to start with the First Lady, Ms. Monica Genkos, who is the First Lady of the Republic of Namibia. She's a qualified lawyer with over 20 years of experience in the financial sector with senior roles in capital markets, corporate finance, and private equity. She was awarded the National Honors, that is the most distinguished order of Namibia, by former President Pohamba for her outstanding contribution to the socio-economic development of her country, Namibia. She was inducted into the Namibian Business Hall of Fame and received numerous awards such as the Namibian Business Personality of the Year and Most Innovative Entrepreneur. During her time in the private sector, Monica was regularly rated by local and continental media publications as one of the most influential Namibian and recognized by international media as one of Africa's top 100 economic leaders. Before assuming the First Lady role in 2015, she was co-shareholder and managing director of Namibia's largest private equity fund for over a decade. During this time, she served on the boards of a large public and private sector companies as either chairperson or deputy chairperson. Thank you very much. Can you please come to the front and speak to us? Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to stand on the very extensive protocol that was established by President Ramaphosa, but I'd also like to thank the two co-chairs for this excellent intergenerational collaboration that you have, because both voices are important. I think we look at things differently, and it's important to have both represented. I'd like also to thank the ambassador. I've promised, I know he's got somewhere to go, but I've promised him to speak for at least an hour and hold him here further. Thank you very much for your kindness. I've got a voice problem, so please excuse me, but I want to just recognize the exceptional leadership that I witnessed here today from President Cyril Ramaphosa and what he said about gender-based violence and femicide. I'm here not as the First Lady of Namibia. I'm here as the President of the Organization of African First Ladies. And one of the things that we try and do is really spotlight attention on issues that we believe aren't getting enough focus. And issues of gender-based violence often result in awkward conversations. Let me tell you the truth. I enjoyed every awkward moment, confrontation and conversation that was had this morning. Because without awkward and difficult conversations, we don't make progress in addressing things that we'd rather not talk about. So it's a great honor to be able to deliver these short remarks at the Presidential Summit on Gender-Based Violence and Femicide. Because in theory, we're all against gender-based violence, but in practice, we're not. The home is meant to be the ultimate safe space, but in reality, it's the most dangerous place. We all saw the statistic today. You are more likely to be raped in your own home than in a public open space. We need to reflect on that. Our homes are not safe. We talk about ILO Convention to prevent violence and harassment at work because our workplaces are not safe. Schools are not safe. Churches are not safe. Where will women be safe? We saw the statistics. And it's not just South Africa. It's somebody was telling me Namibia is much better. I don't think so, because I think in the world women aren't safe. We, individuals, families, communities, and multi-sectoral leaders often engage in practices, beliefs, and mindsets which fuels, excuses, accepts, and exonerates the mindsets and behavior that drives very problematic behavior and gender-based violence. When we admit that a lot of this behavior happens in the home, we are correct to demand better response from the state, particularly the criminal justice system. But it's also correct to say that a lot of work has to go in prevention, because we cannot be policed in our homes. We must stop these things where they happen, because often it's us who know that the people who must be held accountable are our own loved ones. And when faced in these situations in our homes, we are the first to call family meetings. It's employers who would not want their workplaces to be associated with an act of sexual violence. It's schools who do not want their reputations to be scarred, who do not report. So there is a level of hypocrisy that we need to mitigate in order to get the right statistics. And this is why political leadership matters. This is why the summit matters. A president has a unique convening power, and the leadership displayed by President Cyril Ramaphosa to gather all of you in one room and listen, because this was a listening exercise. And not by an individual, but by bringing his ministers, to bring the premiers, to bring everybody in the response system, because a lot of what was being said landed in the right ears today, because leadership isn't one person, it's all of us at all levels. So this practice of making sure that we gather in a cross-section of society and ensure a rights-based, multi-sectoral approach against gender-based violence and femicide is the type of bold and consistent political leadership that we all benefit from, including the rest of us in the region. So this was not only important from a South African perspective, it's also important from a regional perspective. I doubt there are many countries where politicians will voluntarily convene a meeting so that they can be asked the tough questions we saw being asked here today. There is a humility and sincerity in a presidential summit that is willing to hold itself accountable for what it has delivered and what still requires improvement. Accountability is important. In challenging the multiple responses required, it's important to do a critical evaluation of what's working and what's not working. And we all need to be accountable for our behavior in relation to gender-based violence and SGBV in the public and the private sphere, and to remove the disconnect between what we do in public and what we say and how we act in private. We must also reduce the gap between what our policies say and what our people experience. Governments are responsible to solve our most complex problems, And there's a need to make sure that our best brains are prepared to work in government. Because ultimately, the system is not the leadership of one person. The system is us. If we are not competent and we do not hold each other accountable, people who are not willing or able to do their jobs should be held accountable and make space for the willing and the able. And in this way, the system becomes functional. In this way, the system becomes functional and a true reflection of our collective talent and abilities. In the same vein, I'd like to recognize that we often focus on those not doing their work and end up not paying homage to those who are in the system, who are underpaid, capable, and provide services to the public to the best of their abilities. There are thousands of hardworking, long-suffering public servants and public office bearers at the forefront of the gender-based violence and femicide response who are underpaid, unrecognized, but get up every day and do their work within very challenging circumstances. We've dealt with nurses, police officers who buy airtime, who give taxi money, who buy underwear to victims who've been raped, because that provision isn't made. So today I really do want to recognize the people in the system who are doing their jobs. Civil society's role in holding government is critical, as government is really the one who can move the dial. And as First Ladies, we also have unique convening power. As unelected as we are, many First Ladies across the continent enjoy social capital. And like any type of capital, many First Ladies spend their social capital on issues which require difficult and awkward conversations, very much like what we saw today. This presidential summit was designed to be a listening session to ensure accountability and facilitate the difficult conversations that you'll continue to have. And as African First Ladies, we often provide advocacy on issues which require spotlighting. But today I would really like to use this summit and the first summit as an example of the type of convening that has to happen if we are going to have honest conversations. And this is why South Africa's leadership on gender-based violence has and remains so important. The Organization of African First Ladies has witnessed firsthand what consistency means and what awkward conversation looks like. One of the things that I noticed, there was a circle of champions that was also initiated, I think, under President Ramaphosa's leadership at African Union level, where they had a summit in Kinshasa in 2021 on positive masculinity. A similar summit will be held on the 10th of November 2022, I think in Senegal, under the leadership of Macky Sall. And these circle of champions should be at head of state level, but they also need to be at community level, because there's a lot of introspection that we need to have as communities. There was a comment made earlier that we must stop blaming everything on apartheid. In a way I agree, but in a way I also disagree. Violent mindsets are formed decades before violent acts. And we cannot disagree that a lot of the violence that we do see experience has been formed through violent post-conflict times. So yes, we need to be forward-looking, but we cannot deny our traumatic past and the need to focus on healing, the need to focus on mental health, because that's an issue that's not discussed well enough when we speak about gender-based violence. And to fix the woundedness and the brokenness that we experience as a society. Another thing that I would like to just point out that I picked up at some point that I felt I needed to say something about is prejudice loves company. And we know it from apartheid. Apartheid was as sexist as it was racist. And when we talk about gender-based violence and right-based, we must talk about it from the perspective of not having prejudice. You cannot be against gender-based violence, but you're tribalistic. You cannot be tribalistic, be against tribalism, but you're xenophobic. You cannot be against xenophobia, but you are homophobic. So we must investigate ourselves Because a comment was made here at some point that why was bail given to a non-South African of 10,000 rands for a rape? Why should bail be given for anybody if that's the case? The law should apply to everybody. Rape is offensive and it hurts from a generational perspective regardless of who the rapist is. The video clip played today put a face to statistics and made me wonder whether we prefer to see the faces of women who've been killed in order to show empathy. Because often, when women are being abused, raped, and report their ordeals, they are subjected to victim blaming and gaslighting. Do we want to first see them on these videos before we believe them? And it's us who victim blame. It's us who gaslight. And the only way we can honor the thousands of women who've lost their lives to femicide is to provide the necessary support to women who continue to suffer trauma at the hands of abuse of men, abuse of families, abuse of societies, and then suffer secondary trauma in criminal justice systems that tend to be abusive towards women. Violence is a form of communication, and we must enable more constructive forms of communication. And at the core of this is rebuilding a society where we recognize each other's humanity. And when we say we recognize each other's humanity, I'll be finished now, thank you, and rebuilding our societies, it's also saying to each other, if we're speaking against gender-based violence, we must speak against violence in general. Gender-based violence does not exist within a vacuum. It exists within a society that is generally violent. Men are the biggest victims of violence. A man in this country is much more likely to be killed or assaulted by another man. So men are actually the biggest victims of violence. So gender-based violence is high because the same man who's willing to kill another man because he offended him, what do you think he'll do to his partner in his home? So I really want to end by saying, as an organization of African First Ladies, we are with you. This is not just a South African issue. This summit is not just important from a South African perspective. It's important for all of us because all of us are crafting the same roadmaps. And you're showing a key example of why civil society is important, why younger progressive women sharing these spaces are important, why all of us are important. So thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much for that brilliant talk. You hail from Namibia. You were the first country to actually sign off on to ratify the C-190. So that is great. It shows that your country is very serious about gender-based violence. So now, time is not on our side. We still have quite a number of sessions that we need to go to, commissions that we need to go to. So I'm going to be very brief, and I'm hoping that we are going to be brief, if we can, 5 minutes at most. That's the time that we're giving you. I'm going to introduce Ambassador Sandra Kramer. She arrived in Pretoria in August 2022, so she's very new to take up her duties here as the European Union's ambassador to South Africa, after having been an Africa director at the European Commission's Directorate General for International Partnerships since June 2019. I'm not going to go further other than to say that she joined the European Commission in 1995 in the Directorate General of External Relations, and during this period, she serves as a trade counselor at the EU delegation to Indonesia and as head of economic cooperation at the EU delegate to India. The EU, as we heard earlier on what the President was saying, they've really been a ROC's supporter, for the work that we're doing in South Africa with regard to gender-based violence. May I ask you to kindly come to the front and then be able to take the floor, please.
Thank you very much, Program Director. President Ramaphosa, I know he's no longer in the audience, but I wanted to just recognize him and recognize the leadership that he has provided in convoking this presidential summit. Honorable ministers, deputy ministers, excellencies, members of the Executive Council, members of civil society, summit delegates, and all guests, all protocols observed. This is a great event. It's very lively, it's very emotional, and I'm pleased and very honored on behalf of the members of the Gender Development Partner Coordination Group that comprises the member states of the European Union, the United States government through USAID, the United Kingdom, Switzerland and Canada. And we strongly support the government of South Africa's commitment to addressing gender-based violence and femicide, and we very much welcome the second presidential summit on this issue, which has indeed been exacerbated during the COVID-19 pandemic. As partners working closely with the South African government and with civil society, we share your concerns about the shockingly high prevalence of gender-based violence, especially against women, girls and members of the LGBTIQA+ community. It's important to examine the social and cultural norms that give rise to discrimination, gender inequalities and gender-based violence, and to realize the role that we all play in this regard, men and women, boys and girls, in schools, in offices, everywhere. At the first summit, we committed to support programs aligned with national priorities, and we did. And the President just mentioned it in his speech. Our joint commitments amount to 1 billion rand to programs implemented by civil society and government, such as Germany's GIZ's Partnership for Prevention, or Canadians' Voice and Leadership Programme, or the United Kingdom's support to the GBVF Fund, or the EU support to gender-based violence-free zones, or the first GBF prevalence survey, and directly to the Department of Women, Youth and Persons with Disabilities. Today, we're here to assess progress. Have our interventions transformed the drivers of violence against women? What should be amplified and accelerated? Those are the questions we address at this summit. And we use this opportunity to take stock. We also believe it's an important opportunity to renew commitments and strengthen collaboration so we can achieve better coherence in implementation of the National Strategic Plan on GBVF. A key dimension of the National Strategic Plan is collaboration between all stakeholders. And in this respect, we, like many of you, eagerly await the establishment of the funded National Council on Gender-Based Violence and Femicide. We also look forward to the coordination and the oversight that that body will provide. Improved coordination and leadership will increase coherence of individual policies, but also between policies. And in addition to the National Strategic Plan, there are a number of other relevant policies and programs, the implementation of which is key, urgent, and part of the overall approach to fighting gender-based violence. And they include, and they were discussed before, the National Integrated Crime and Violence Prevention Strategy, the National Strategic Plan for HIV, TB, and STI, and the implementation of a National Plan on Women, Peace and Security. This can only happen with increased commitment to action and funding. In the last 2 decades, there's been a growing global recognition that investments in gender equality and women's rights organizations should no longer be regarded as a cost, but as an investment, and as an investment that yields returns. Experience in South Africa, but also many other countries, have shown what is working in the fight against gender-based violence. And the necessary tools are known and proven. It's now time to implement. We all hope that this summit will lead to concrete resolutions of what should be amplified and what should be accelerated. We stand alongside the government and civil society in South Africa in their continued efforts to realize a society free from gender-based violence to the benefit for all of us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your continued support, to South Africa. And let's continue working together, particularly that we have got a global common agenda that I talked about right at the beginning. Now I'm going to introduce the Honorable Right the Right Honourable Patricia Scotland, who is Secretary General of the Commonwealth, very passionate person when it comes to the question of gender-based violence. Patricia Scotland was born in the Commonwealth of Dominica. She's the 10th of the 12 children and grew up in London. She completed her LLB honours, London University, at the age of 20 and was called to the bar at Middle Temple at the age of 21. Her career has been marked by achieving a number of extraordinary firsts, not least which was to be the first woman in the more than 700-year history of the office to serve as Her Majesty's Attorney General for England and Wales and for Northern Ireland. As the only woman to have been appointed Secretary General of the Commonwealth, she's placing special emphasis on mobilizing the 56 nations of the Commonwealth to tackle climate change, including its disproportionate impact on women, and also through enterprises to build the resilience of smaller or more vulnerable countries. She is working hard to eliminate domestic violence and violence against women and girls, and I'm very pleased to invite you to come to the floor and come and speak to the nation. You are not just speaking to people that are here, but the whole nation.
Your Excellencies, particularly I want to pay homage to President Cyril Ramaphosa for his extraordinary leadership. But I also want to pay real homage to all the ministers, all the civil society groups, and everyone here today. This morning has been painful, and we ask ourselves why. Because we have had to face the truth of gender-based violence and the scar that it places on our world. And the President was right when he called it a second pandemic. I've always referred to it as the silent pandemic, which was here long before COVID, because it is the greatest cause of morbidity for women and girls. 1 in 3 women and girls globally. So why did the conversation this morning cause us pain in our heart? Because what people were speaking about today is not just happening to women and girls and children in South Africa. It's happening to women and girls all over the world. And I feel so tired of hearing this story, but so determined and so happy that this story is still being told. But I really wish with all my heart that this issue no longer exists, because we are 28 years since the declaration of the elimination of violence against women. 28 years committing ourselves to change. And I want to say to you that change will come. Change has to come. But let us not fool ourselves. Change will only come if we make it happen, all of us. And it will take all of us, not just government, but local government, businesses, NGOs, individuals, all of us, with one purpose. Because at least 200 million women and girls have undergone female genital mutilation, that's cutting, in 31 countries where the practice is concentrated. At least 2 billion women in our world have experienced sexual harassment. And as we know, as a result of the COVID lockdowns, it just got worse. In some of our countries, it went up by more than 500%. So this pernicious abuse is not only devastating for survivors of violence and their families, it brings huge social and economic costs. It carries a profoundly negative impact on women and girls. Participation in education, employment, and civic life undermines poverty reduction. So the results in lost employment and productivity, and it drains resources from social services, the justice system, healthcare agencies, and employers. In short, it both causes and amplifies inequality. And that inequality has to stop. I've watched this from the age of 21 when I did my first case as a barrister. I saw it when I became a senior barrister and fought for change, and then as a deputy high court judge, then as a foreign minister, then as a justice minister, then as a criminal justice minister, and then lastly as attorney general, and now as secretary general. And I am determined, I am absolutely determined that we will end this violence against women and girls. Our family is a family of 56 nations with 2.5 billion people, 60% of whom are under the age of 30, spread across 5 continents and all the great basins of our one shared ocean. And when our leaders came together, and President Cyril Ramaphosa and the First Lady's husband, President Gallagher, was there with us in Kigali, those 56 leaders put their shoulder to the world and said change was going to happen across our Commonwealth, 1/3 of the world. Because your issues are our issues, your hurts are our hurts, your hopes are our hopes, your children are our children, your future is our future, and we feel your pain. And together, we will have the ideal blends of values and ideas and unified purpose. And I want to tell you about our Commonwealth Says No More campaign, because we have launched an initiative which brings together all the learning, all the understanding from across the Commonwealth, and we've put it into one vital resource, a portal in which we will share everything we know. Because what I heard this morning, I've heard in country after country after country, and we know how to do this. Your national plan is a good plan. What you have come together 4 years ago to decide is the right pathway. And you are right to say this is about implementation. No more talk, we have to do. And together, we are finding the way to do that. So I'm asking everyone to go onto our website to look at our Commonwealth Says No More portal. Use all of it. But also, I'm begging you to add to it, because we need your wisdom, your courage, your information. And data is key. We have been able to work together and create an opportunity and a toolkit which is enabling our countries to assess the economic cost of domestic violence. Whilst I was minister in the United Kingdom, we managed to reduce domestic violence by 64%, and we saved £7.1 billion a year in economic cost. So we can save lives, and we can save money. I want to tell you, do not give up. Do not be silent. Keep on fighting. And I promise you, I, as your Secretary General, will fight with you.
Ambassador, I've already introduced you, so to save time, you have the floor.
To the President of the Republic, His Excellency Cyril Ramaphosa, the First Lady of Namibia, Malaga Gangos, honorable ministers, the government of South Africa, development partners, delegates, distinguished organizers, good afternoon. I am so privileged to stand with you today to represent the government of the United States of America in the fight against gender-based violence and femicide in South Africa. I can also tell you that I'm extraordinarily privileged to listen to the passion and the pain that was so bravely articulated by so many members of civil society earlier today. And I can tell you that I am personally committed to this fight for three very important reasons: human rights, health, and economic growth. First, on human rights. Gender-based violence, sexual exploitation, and femicide are all grave human rights violations. We all know this. But knowing is not enough. We need to confront this evil at its source. And let me say, if I may, that I believe that President Ramaphosa could not be more correct when he said that you cannot confront and defeat gender-based violence unless you engage men. One of the great orators of American history, Frederick Douglass, once said that it is easier to raise strong children than it is to fix broken men. But if we, as men, must fix ourselves, so be it. Let it begin. The United States government strongly believes that these three problems of GBV, sexual exploitation, and femicide, that these three problems in South Africa and in the United States, for that matter, are deeply rooted in gender inequality. So, as we seek to collectively protect South Africans whose rights are violated through gender-based violence and sexual exploitation and femicide, we also need to address the root cause of gender inequality. For that reason, the U.S. government funds programs like the DREAMS Initiative to empower young women and girls here in South Africa to realize their economic and leadership potential. Second, health. Beyond the ravages on one's personal mental health, we know that the experiences of rape or intimate partner violence can increase a person's risk of acquiring HIV years after that violent experience. So if we are going to truly end the HIV epidemic in South Africa, we must also end the scourge of gender-based violence and femicide. For that reason, every single one of the U.S. government's programs related to HIV also addresses gender-based violence and femicide. We must address these challenges holistically and realistically if we are going to overcome them together. Finally, and third, economic growth. Put simply, women make up half the population in South Africa, hold up half the sky. And if women and other potential victims of gender-based violence and femicide fear for their lives and the lives of their loved ones, they cannot realize their true economic potential. And given the economic challenges that are faced today, both in South Africa and in the United States and elsewhere, we cannot afford to lose those vital economic contributions of women. We cannot meet the economic challenges that we face today without the full spectrum of contributions that women provide to society, to the workplace, and in the home. And so I challenge each of us, including myself, to address gender-based violence holistically, to confront the issue boldly, and to create a supportive environment for the survivors, not the victims, the survivors, now and in the future. Because ultimately, our societies flourish when women feel safe, equal, and empowered. I look forward to working with the government of the Republic of South Africa and with all of our partners to eradicate gender-based violence and femicide as a national crisis. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We have come to the end of this particular session. They always say that if you want to go far, don't go alone, go with others. And we have done so because President Ramaphosa had started a program at the AU which really focused on gender-based violence, including introducing the Convention on Gender-Based Violence on women dealing with gender issues. I'm now tired, you can see. So we have included them, and we also note the fact that the President has been doing quite a lot of work on generation equality, which is a global program that deals with the question of women's equality. So I've come to the end of this session, but now I'd like to have my co-chair from civil society here to come and give information on how we move forward. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Colleagues and friends, we have to do some managing in order to regain the time that we have lost. So most of us are here to go into these commissions that we have been talking about, and we are going to move into them straight after this. Pillar 1 is going to be at the auditorium. Pillar 2, the ballroom. Pillar 3, hall 1. Pillar 4, behind exhibition hall. Pillar 5, behind plenary. And Pillar 6, Gallagher 1. Gallagher Grill, Pillar 6, that's where it's going to be. It will be signposted and you will be able to go there. Just for completeness sake, Pillar 1 is the accountability pillar, we've talked about that. Pillar 2 is the pillar that deals with prevention and rebuilding social cohesion. Pillar 3, it's the criminal justice system. Pillar 4 is the support and healing pillar. Pillar 5, economic empowerment. And Pillar 6 is the research, data pillar. For people who are unclear what is going to happen there, we have provided one-pagers, and so as you go into the pillars, you can just come past here and then take them there. There will be people from government and people from civil society who will lead these pillars. And here, this will be the space to talk about the work that has happened under the various pillars and what it is that we want to see accelerated. And so that's the beginning of the accountability work that we are going to do. There will be ministers in some of these pillars and high-ranking government officials who will be able to answer the questions that you have. So we'll go now. We have lost an entire agenda item, which we are going to roll back to tomorrow. We were supposed to go into these pillar commissions and then go to the action caucuses. So we will come back tomorrow and start with the action caucuses. So do the pillar work, and then there will be rapporteurs there who will work on the report back. I think we're close here now. We're not going to come back. Yes. So we should finish the pillar conversations around 6 o'clock. We do not have to come back here. So this will be the time when we say goodbye for today. And thank you so much for indulgence. And once again, apologies for not sticking to the time and the program. Thank you very much. Hi, if you have lost car keys or a rucksack, please come forward. Car keys, rucksack, please come forward. The progress report is out there. The progress report is out there, so you can pick a copy. And the guidance for civil society engagement during this